Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited for this next panel here, and I'd like to introduce this interoperability panel with our moderator, Jad, Chahine, partner at Superscrypt, and panelists Bert Banksy, core contributor at XION, Relic, founder and CEO of Cashmere Labs, Professor Sriram from UT Austin, and Bowen Wang, head of protocol at NEAR. I'll hand it off.
Testing. There we go. Cool. Awesome. Very excited to talk to you guys today about probably one of the more important topics within the blockchain ecosystem, which is interoperability. As most of you already know, there's hundreds of L1s and L2s out there, and communicating between them hasn't been so easy. It's been causing a lot of challenges in terms of the user experiences and even building in the space. So there's been a lot of movement done to solve this. We're working on solving it. And I'm very excited to have these panelists here today to dive into interoperability. So first, let's get this discussion going. Today we're going to be talking about why interoperability, the risks, types, use cases, and the future. But for a quick framing, Bert, why don't you just share with me what does interoperability mean in blockchain?
I would say that interoperability feels like a Band-Aid in a lot of different kind of connotations of this, which is there's a lot of aspects which feels weird to need to solve for, which is like things should communicate in an open way, people should be collaborative, and the ethos of composability should be true. And so I would say working at interoperability, it feels weird answering this because interoperability feels like it should be a baseline when at the end of the day, I think what we solve for is trying to catch up with a lot of innovation, but then a lot of different kind of movements. But I would say at the end of the day, interoperability just means communication.
Yeah, the same question?
Yeah, I mean, do you have anything to add to that?
Not exactly. Yeah, the idea is from the beginning is to, by communicating the chains, trying to make it intra-chain experience first, the cross-chain experience, and then maybe in the future like a centralized exchange experience. So we need to be able to move relaxedly between the chains. That's the general idea in the simplest way.
Sriram, why don't you share with us some of the challenges we've been facing to make things more interoperable?
Sure thing. Oh, great, it works. Okay. So, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about history. Do people, anybody here, have the same amount of gray hair as I do? Yes, I see some people do. Do you remember the early TCP/IP days? Anybody at all? Do you remember there were token rings and this and that, and IBM was championing something, somebody else was championing something. It was just one giant, I think the technical term for it starts with the word cluster. But eventually, what scaled very well, there was a common messaging system that was designed to be distributed and provably distributed back then, which, what happened with it. But eventually, interoperability became the only way to scale the internet, and TCP/IP and World Wide Web, which was invented here in the Boston area, took over. So another way of thinking about it is we're in that early stage when there is many different ways to think about what could be ways for different ecosystems to work together. The reason it's so challenging is it's fragmented, just like the early days of Token Ring and ARPANET. But that's going to change and has to change. Otherwise, any type of meaningful interaction becomes very difficult. It becomes very high friction, which is, as you see, a big pain today. And so it will be solved. It just we'll go through the same pains as we did back in the early days of TCP/IP.
I mean, to build off of that, how will it be solved, right? How are we going to get to a standard?
So the funny thing is, in the early internet world, Some of this was organic, but then there were associations that came together, particularly one called the IEEE, a bunch of others who made this happen because they said, hey, without interoperability, we will not be able to scale with devices. You want this on every quote-unquote personal computer back then, right? How does this work? And so I think a very similar phenomenon is going to happen here because we want this to percolate past the limited set of users we have today to the billions. And the only way that is going to scale to the billions in end-user devices and ultimately IoT and so on is really either an organic push of one of them winning or a standardization effort, or both coming together.
I guess to take it to the next level in terms of what's actually happening, Bowen, can you share how you guys are solving for interoperability at NEAR?
Yeah. So to maybe add some background, yeah, we actually started solving pretty much the way everyone else did, which is through bridges. And we actually started building a bridge between NEAR and Ethereum even before we launched mainnet, so early 2020. And back then, those bidirectional trustless bridge is a quite novel thing. And I think maybe even the idea of bridge was relatively new. And I think the prevalent thought back then was that you just have multi-sig on both sides, and then you can bridge. And obviously if something happens wrong with those multi-sigs, and as we have seen many times in the history, that there's like huge hacks, right? And so we decided that it's important for that to be trustless, and we started with the development of Rainbow Bridge, which uses essentially light clients, smart contracts on both sides, right? So on NEAR we have a Ethereum light client running a smart contract, and then on Ethereum there's a NEAR light client running a smart contract, and then you can trustlessly update the light client, and then as a result, you can basically prove to the other chain that something transaction is successful on the other chain, and that's how you do the interop, right? I mean, that's a very good first step, and actually Rainbow Bridge today has been operating for a few years and very battle tested, very secure and so on. But still, I think a problem that many people face with Bridge today is that, well, one is there's still this big security concern. Like, even though you can say that, well, something has been operating for several years without issues, still there, you never know. Like, if you do some upgrade of like even like something like not super related, some like relayer or infrastructure, whatever, like it's something catastrophic can actually happen. Another one, I guess, is with the experience, right? Because if you have only like 2 or 3 chains that are dominant, so to speak, then yes, bridges make sense. You can just have like a pair of bridges between each one of them. But once you have like tens or like even more chains out there, then it's become like managing like across those bridges become difficult. And actually, I think we do already see this with Ethereum L2s, right? Like if people like if anyone here tried to use many different L2s together, you will feel the pain of bridging back and forth and all that stuff. So that's why we started developing this idea called chain abstraction. So the idea is that instead of actually doing bridging to do the interop, we decided to not actually do bridge, and so to have this essentially this idea called chain signatures that allow users to control essentially all of their accounts on different chains through one account on NEAR. And that actually allows us to do this kind of multi-chain swap in a native way. I mean, I can talk more about that later if we have time, but basically the idea is that you can essentially, when you do a swap, it kind of happens on both chains natively. Like on Ethereum, there's transaction from one address to another address. On NEAR, there's transaction from address to another address. Just all the transaction actually originates from NEAR because there's one account that actually controls all your accounts through this thing called chain signature, which is like a trustless way for a set of validators to hold the key on behalf of users, and they can sign on behalf of user, and that can not only sign transaction on NEAR, and can also sign transactions on other compatible chains. So pretty much like all the EVM and actually any chain that supports ECDSA curve right now.
So in summary, using this chain abstraction and the Rainbow Bridge and the Near ID, you should be able to do anything you want from one location.
Right. That's the idea. So I mean, the new idea kind of supersedes Rainbow Bridge and what we have built so far. It's like this new world that we're
Yes.
ushering to.
And then I want to ask you, Bernd, because you guys are also working on chain abstraction yourself. I think the direction that you guys are going is a little bit more quote unquote mainstream, meaning anyone should be able to interact with the blockchain, any blockchain, using XION. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you guys think about chain abstraction?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think for anyone who's kind of been in the industry a while, you'll know that narratives tend to kind of morph in a way where you kind of have what intents used to be is pretty much moving now towards this narrative of chain abstraction, and a lot of it ends up being the same kind of thing. And I think I'm huge respect of Nia, and it's interesting of how we both kind of approach this from different angles. Where what we believe is that we believe that users shouldn't even need to know what a wallet is. They shouldn't need to know anything about crypto if they don't want to. And the only thing that needs to exist is just the end of the product. And so one of the major cornerstones of the XION network is everything is a smart contract account. So rather than trying to make the wallet experience better, we've inherently removed wallets, for lack of better words, which then allow us to do some interesting stuff. We're actually not tied down to one signature curve. We can be signature agnostic, as we like to say. But at the end of the day, like chain abstraction, of course it's a narrative, but I think the way that we solve it is just by trying to move everything, trying to move chains, trying to move gas fees, doing it through smart contract accounts. And then if you would imagine like a web where everything is kind of interconnected via smart contract accounts, I think that's the way that we, for obviously kind of sparing a lot of detail here, that's the way that we want to assume everything to kind of happen, just so that no one really needs to know.
And we want to dive into later on, not because I actually want to move to cross-chain liquidity with Relic, but we should, towards the end of it, we'll talk about like what use cases does this enable when you abstract the chain out of it and you just let people interact with blockchain however they want. But Relic, you guys are focused predominantly on basically liquidity fragmentation by being able to offer cross-chain liquidity. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying what you guys are doing, but the focus is more on liquidity, as right now, fragmented liquidity is one of the core issues of interoperability. How are you thinking about cross-chain liquidity, and how do you think we can make it interoperable?
So I think the idea is simple because we're seeing new chains day by day, basically, and they all need a lot of liquidity just to make a new chain tradable. And I know, a lot of people are making up money because we're launching new chains, but the thing is, it's open to be forgettable when you launch that many of chains that are not going to be maybe just somehow better than each other, but for a few months or for a year, and that's it. And then you just, forget the old chain. But so the thing is, you need hundreds of millions for each of them. And right now, I know just in the top 10 chains, we have over 40 billion TVL, which is an enormous amount. And these are the ones that somehow manage to, collect liquidity because of their partners or investors or themselves. So the idea is simple we need to somehow, make them able to be within a one pool so each of them won't need a new liquidity, a new native token, or new hundreds of millions. So yeah, I think it's a pretty important thing to do, to connect between the chains, because at the end of the day, the users don't know about interoperability. They just want to swap their assets. They just want to move from one chain to the other, and they don't care about the rest. So in the UX side, we need to be, simplified and basically go on with it.
Sriram, if you'd like to talk about cross-chain liquidity, you can. Would you like to have a comment on that, or otherwise we can go to modularity?
Maybe I'd go ahead with modularity, because I think the two are very related. But let me speak to the modular paradigm how to think about interoperability. So in the modular paradigm, you might think it's a fairly different situation than the more monolithic or integrated paradigm. But the challenge is still that there's many different ecosystems, whether they're working on the DA or on execution or on other aspects, sequencing. And interoperability there becomes very important because of potential fragmentation, both on the data side as well as on different mechanisms to be able to handle the overall execution. And so in the modular domain, interoperability typically is thought of in multiple different ways. One key way is settlement. The fact that you have a settlement layer that goes between different DAs and different execution is pretty important. And I know many of you are already familiar with this. Most of you are already familiar with this. So what I'm going to speak next about is the universal settlement layer, what we call USL. A universal settlement layer is one that sits between the execution and the data availability consensus in a way that helps settle and make sure there's consistency before the ultimate transaction is secured. Now, this USL is pretty important, both from a interoperability perspective and ultimately overall consistency of state. Now, even more, it's important for a settlement to work with data availability. And please tell me if I'm speaking Greek. Everybody good with what I just said? I hope so. So the settlement layer, think of it as a necessary, it's similar to TradFi, right? Where you have a consistency mechanism that sits between different banks. You do need a consistency mechanism, and it's essential for modular systems to be able to grow organically, grow horizontally across different applications, and ultimately for data availability and sequencing to work closely with the settlement layer for state consistency. And so this interaction is going to become more and more important as modular systems grow. And I'm happy to say that I'm heavily involved in working on the USL. And I'm happy to add more color on the USL if you need after this session is over.
Well, when it comes to modularity, I mean, the reason modularity exists is because, I think we've gotten to a point where, different transactions require kind of different levels of security, different routes.
Yep.
If let's, hypothetical example, there's a game, there's maybe trading of financial assets or NFTs as opposed to completing an action.
Yep.
Certain transactions should cost less than others. They need to be less
100%.
secure than others.
100%.
So that's the concept of modularity is being able to plug in what's required either for your app or for your transaction, and introduce more complexity, because the more pieces that you try to glue together,
Yep.
the more work you have to do to try to make them speak to one another the right way.
Exactly. So it becomes more complex from an interaction perspective, but it becomes less complex from an execution and ultimately security, underlying security perspective, because now you can choose the level of security based on which particular consensus mechanism, and your execution doesn't have to be exactly replicated. You can actually abstract out the execution, take a proof, and use that to settle and to be able to secure the chain. Right now, even for the smallest of things, we have to replicate the execution everywhere, which is highly inefficient. So modular systems give you much greater efficiency, much greater modularity, much greater performance within each segment, but settlement is essential for it to be ultimately consistent.
Bowen, would love to hear your thoughts on modularity and interoperability.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very interesting topic. So we're also working on this, kind of just to add on what Sriram just said, this kind of consistent settlement layer that allows for faster and like better settlement than what we see today. So like, for example, today we have like different L2s on Ethereum, and then if you want to kind of do any kind of interoperability between them, you need to wait for it to settle on something. And I think most people use the L1 as the settlement layer, But you can also think about potentially building something between that has maybe less, not strictly as much crypto economic security as the Ethereum L1, but still sufficient that would that would probably be good for a lot of use cases, and it would provide much better guarantees, for example, like much faster than if you have to go through L1 and so on. So yeah, actually we're building a thing called fast finality layer with eigenlayer, basically providing this kind of middle layer that helps L2s to settle there, and so that you can do the interoperability much faster.
Thank you for that. Relic, when you were talking, you mentioned if you do cross-chain liquidity the right way, you may not even need to launch your own token. This is actually an interesting concept because, for what it's worth, blockchain is predicated on a protocol launching a token, and that token being the kind of central form of currency for those users. As things become more interoperable, do you think the dynamics around community and tokens will change because you can move liquidity much easier from one place to another?
Yeah, to start with, I don't think it's the right idea to, when you're building a protocol, you must make your token somehow valuable. And because of that, I see a lot of systems can be, less productive than they can become. So that's number one. If you are really confident about your product, then you can just somehow attach the token to it in a weaker way, and then just go on with it, in my opinion. So what was the question again?
It was as cross-chain liquidity.
Yeah. All right. So until now, we have seen a lot of models that you have to use a certain token to cross between the chains or swaps. Yeah. All right. But if you think of Stargate, this stable swap app who basically uses interoperability in a most efficient way, if you have two assets in different chains, two same assets, then the process is simple. You can just get to the one pool. User just gives this token to you or USDT or whatever else, and then via interoperability message, you just deliver this information to the destination chain, and that pool, since you have the same asset in destination chain, then you can just deliver it to the user easily. So what prevents is to make it with some other assets other than stables, or swapping between the assets as well, not the same asset. It's bringing some other problems to have cross-chain liquidity, basically. Number one, you can add cross-chain liquidity to start with. But yeah, I think that's basically it.
Okay. And then Zion, from your perspective, because like in theory, the target users you're going after may not be super crypto native. They may not necessarily have the same affinity as a typical protocol and their appreciation for that token. How are you going to get the validators or the stakers or people involved in the token to make sure they can continue to secure the network if you don't necessarily have such a deep focus on, let's say, the community, because the community isn't necessarily involved with the token?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, but I think, and it's, I would say the way that we look at our protocol, and I think back in November we announced a pretty big partnership with Circle, which effectively establishes USDC as the primary transactional currency on all products across the chain. The reason for this is because people shouldn't have to learn what an Ethereum is, or if they're especially new, they shouldn't have to learn what a native token is. It is one of the big barriers of entry of entering a new ecosystem, especially one where the denomination is in some random four-letter word. And so for us, everything's denominated in dollars, and I think the way that we're able to do this to other chains is kind of having Zion as this token where everything then settles to. And so when you have fees, and we wrote a whole blog about how unsustainable tokenomics and a lot of hyperinflation leads to some pretty poor, you can have pretty awesome result for validators and stakers initially, but that ends up leading to hyperinflation. But I mean, if you want to take this economies of scale kind of approach, denominate everything in dollars, and then take fees, and whether that be like an auction buyback or a buyback and burn method, however way you distribute that to people, I think no matter what way you're kind of getting into this, like, and I think community can be on the power user side of like the pure staking, the pure delegation, et cetera. But I think if you're looking to have, let's say, USD as a primary denomination, it's actually very, very easy because, you know, very surprisingly, people like to make money. And especially if you can get more entrants into an industry or into an ecosystem or into a product by tearing down the barriers of entry, you end up making people more money at the end of the day. And yeah, sure, they're not using the direct token as that form of payment, but it then settles to that token. And people are getting, people are getting rewarded for obviously securing the network in that way, even though it's not inherently direct. So I think it is a pretty legacy decision. I think it's pretty legacy. I think it's pretty stupid. I think it's pretty overdone to have a native token as a primary denomination. And I hope to see it go away in the future because it's just not sustainable or conducive to growth.
That's this is not something that is typically talked about, right? Like not launching a protocol without the token kind of being front and center. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. Very cool. In terms of, the more we abstract, the easier we make it for someone to use blockchain. Kind of the more difficult it is on the back end to make it all work together. So I'm Sriram, and you were talking about modularity and standards. Can you share how can we actually make it easy for those developers to build, or easier to build? Yeah.
100%. So one of the biggest and most shocking things for me, even today, is the friction that, how many of you have tried to use an average bridge? I won't pick on any one bridge. Was it fun? Okay, thank you. How many of you have actually tried to go between L2s? Was that fun? No, likely not. Yeah, it is. We are as a community, we're a B2C community. We work with people on a daily basis. You might think we might be better at UX than we are today. It's almost shocking that some of those B2E and E2E companies are better at UX than we are. But again, I think these are the early days. There is a genuine opportunity in interoperability to get better at UX, especially, and it's true even in the completely monolithic space, but particularly in the modular space, because as we get more modular, the ability to have interfaces that each of these modular systems can integrate with, that lead to a much better user experience compared to conventional bridges. Now, some bridges have done a good job, but conventional bridges, conventional wallets, conventional interchain interactions, there is a unique opportunity to do that. In fact, I would say there's an opportunity for any one of you, or all of you, to step in to work on that in the modular domain today. Let me particularly give an example of data availability. I'm just going to pick on that because I think there's opportunity there. In terms of the interaction between all the modular systems, to be able to do very efficient DA and to have sort of an on-demand DA where you can almost on a per block or a per interaction basis determine how the DA is done, and then to be able to integrate that with an overall experience for the developer and for the user, I think is a fantastic opportunity today across different DA platforms as well. Actually, and if you don't mind talking quickly about DA, my colleague from MIT, Professor Muriel Medard, is in the audience, and she also works on DA, and I wanted to give her a shout out as well.
Amazing, thank you. And Bowen, to build off of that, I mean, you guys have been putting some of this theory into practice at NEAR. Go ahead.
What's your question?
You've been putting some of this theory into practice about making it easier for developers to come build on it. Can you tell us like how that experience has been? How do you, are you seeing better traction in terms of Rainbow Bridge, et cetera, and interoperability?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the, I mean, Rainbow Bridge is mostly like a user-facing thing. It's less so about developers, but the new account abstraction, or sorry, the new account aggregation and chain abstraction idea, yeah, that definitely resonated a lot with developers who want to build on top. I think the problem is, yeah, as you have already alluded to, like I think this UX, part of this UX problem is that for like user, it is pretty big like mental load to keep track of, you know, like 16 L2s that you're using, and or like maybe that's like slightly easier, but then if you use 16 L1s, then you're maybe completely screwed because you need to remember like the quirks of like each one of them and how their wallet works and all of that, right? So there's definitely, we definitely saw this need to have like more unified interface here, and actually that's what we're doing with chain abstraction, which is to kind of abstract that out into like one single account where you can actually control all of them, and you can sign transactions on all those different chains, whether it's L1 or L2, from that one account, and you know, send transactions there. So I think that is what is kind of very attractive to both users and also, well, I mean, for users, more like, well, they don't need to care about all that stuff. I mean, I mean, I think they never care about like which exact blockchain they're using, but they care about the experience, right? And then for developers, like, well, how could I provide a good experience for users, right? So that's where we're doing a lot, putting a lot of effort into.
Are you seeing some of that come to fruition today? Are there some developers that are building certain use cases?
Yes, so especially I think one of the main, or like one of the very kind of attractive and maybe even like natural idea from that is you can do like a multi-chain DEX, or like a true multi-chain DEX where it doesn't actually involve bridges. Like you can, it's pretty magical that you can swap, let's say, Bitcoin for Ethereum on Near, and that actually works without you having to kind of interact with your Bitcoin and Ethereum wallets and so on. You can do this for other different pairs as well, and all that is, yeah. I think you know what. When we first kind of floated this idea with different teams that we're familiar with, we were all like very excited about the possibility of actually, you know, making that happen.
Amazing. That is very exciting. So thank you for sharing. Rel, a quick question for you. Every time you're going to hand the microphone to Bernd, I'm going to ask you a question. So the question for you is I know we talked about cross-chain liquidity, which is essentially moving assets, right, or tokens from one chain to another. You know, it's not just about assets, it's just about messaging as well. Do you see different type of interoperability for something that's maybe not an asset, maybe just sending a message back and forth?
I'm sorry, can you
so,
explain further?
Yeah, so there's different types of cross-chain methods. Just more curious to hear about, you know, which method that you're more excited about.
Yeah, honestly, we only used interoperability, you know, messaging to let the other pools know about each other. And for that, we've actually using our own layer 3 to, you know, because if you try to connect all of the chains, let's say 6 chains we have, and they need to know about each other all the time. So when you complete a transaction, let's say Ethereum in between Arbitrum, then you're gonna need to let know about this transaction specifically to all of the 4 other chains. So which doesn't make sense. So that's why we have choose the way to go. If we have some home chain to just let that know, and then this one just can let the other ones know, then it would be more efficient. So yeah, that's I would say our way to go.
Thank you. You can give the microphone to Bernd now. You can have it now. Bernd, just you know, a little bit more on the mainstream side, but what exciting use cases are you seeing or you think are coming, you know, that are powered by interoperability or made possible by interoperability?
Made possible by interoperability? I would just say I'm just so sick of the same 4 products in this industry. And I just need some sort of innovation on the application side, and then I'd be happy. And I think the issue with that is like, yeah, great, you can go from a lending protocol on one chain to a lending protocol on another chain, and like the incentives are either your airdrop farming or they're vampire attacking, right? And there's, I would say, like, aside from like Uniswap, there really is, and I guess like to say that, right, there's no real incentive to be an application in this industry. Like, you look at the top 100 on CoinMarketCap, it is all infra. You look at where venture capital is flowing, it is all infra, and it's very, very difficult because as an application, the only audience you have are the crypto native, and you have this like z-axis when it comes to marketing of, okay, I have this, man 18 to 24 likes this, and then you need to add this brand new area of, well, how crypto native are they? How many wallets do they have? And you're always going to be consistently capped by wallets, and you're going to be consistently capped by knowledge, plus, let alone the negative stigma that comes with this entire industry. So I think that having literally anything would be awesome, and being able to have an application would be really cool, because we were trying to make designs, and I could probably list 10 products. All of them probably had to raise north of $30 million to become actual consumer applications, right? And it's like Blackbird, and it's, I would say like Blackbird and like maybe Sound XYZ and something like that, but there really is nothing. And I am excited for something. And yeah, and I think it's done via interoperability because people shouldn't need to know. And I think the more of a Web 2 experience we can provide and the larger total addressable market we can provide to products, the more incentivizing it is to actually build applications in this industry.
Yeah. I hear it's a little bit less about like chain loyalty, more about like content or like experience loyalty.
Yeah, it's funny. We have someone building on us today, and they're doing like this. They're trying to do VR chain abstraction. It's like effectively like an app store across all the across like a bunch of chains, like starting with Injective and Barachain, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm looking at their designs today, and it's like change from Injective, change from Bara. I'm like, why the fuck are you doing this? I'm like, just do the products. It's the only thing that people should care about at the end of the day are the products. And it's, as a user, I shouldn't care where the product is living. I should care about what I'm doing. And I think for some odd reason, that is the hardest thing to get people's minds around, which is like, I think chain loyalty is great if you want to like be in the Stone Age when it comes to this industry. But I think if we want to actually build products, we need to actually build products.
Actually, to add to that, tribalism is the bane of our industry, and obviously the bane of interoperability. We've become worse than a bunch of bickering, warring tribes, and I really hope that changes quickly.
Thanks, guys.
We planned that.
So, I mean, leading off of that, and we basically only have time for one or two more questions, but, assuming that interoperability is going to mature in this ecosystem, assuming that it's going to be very easy to transact regardless of blockchain, but more on the experience. If you want to, play a game on one chain and then continue over on another chain, it should just be very, very seamless. Although those games are built on different chains, it isn't required to actually engage with those chains. So assuming that interoperability develops and those use case develop, I'm just curious, where do you guys see, each of you, the state of blockchain being in like 2 years' time? It's not 10 years' time, but like, do you think that interoperability will be here and already start to make an impact in the next 2 years? And how do you see that playing out? We can start from Bowen and work our way down.
Oh, it's definitely hard to predict what's going to happen 2 years from now, especially in crypto. But yeah, definitely we're building this infrastructure for the future, and then our goal is hopefully that users don't need to care about what underlying blockchain they're using. They just, as Bernd said, they just care about apps. Right? There's like a whole bunch of apps. Okay, I go in and then just start using it right away. Maybe I don't even know much about blockchain. I kind of sign up with my email and somehow on the back end. So what we're doing is like well, actually some keys generated and they get held by this this validator network that would sign on behalf of the user, and then people can just start freely using different apps and use their liquidity from any of the chains, and even though they don't need to think about what assets I hold, it's all like in one interface for them.
Thank you. Sriram?
So as everybody knows from sociology meets social theory, a multipolar world is hard, a unipolar world is unstable, bipolar, tripolar is where things typically end up. And so my guess is from everything that has happened in the internet, web 1.0, 2.0, it'll either be one or two canonical, maybe three canonical systems. Everybody else will coalesce. Will be, and I don't know if that's 2 years, I don't know if that's 5, I don't know if it's 10, but it has to go that way if...
Can you give us a prediction on which 2 or 3 that's going to be?
I wish. If I knew that, I'll go invest in them tomorrow and not tell you guys. But, but yes, one can guess, but yes, for sure. That's my guess.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think predicting future, especially in a fast industry like crypto, is especially hard. But the slogan, the aim is already written, 1 billion DeFi users. So that means someone's grandma needs to be able to use DeFi, and we're getting there step by step. I don't believe it's gonna happen within a few years with a revolutionary project or a company like that. But we're all gonna be little steps towards it. And yeah, at some point, I think all of the chains, all of the options must be, unified somewhere. So that's why I'm building in cross-chain. So we're gonna see, but I hope so.
Cool. I would say, like, opposed to these guys, I think it's very easy, and I could probably exactly predict exactly where we're gonna be. I think the problem is going to get significantly worse for the next 2 years. I have been inundated with enough L3s and new Bitcoin L2s this weekend that it makes my head shake. And there's no incentive to fix this problem. Like, there is consistently more money going into making the problem worse than actually making the problem better. And I think if we just have like 5 more Alt L1s, we'll solve it. Like just 5 more, and then that's the magic number, and then we'll figure it out. But no, like I think it's one of those things which is, I just think that we're entering. I think, like, if we just play this out a lot more, and the L2s, the L3s, the L4s, we're just going down the app chain thesis. And in my mind, that's just kind of where I see a lot of things going. I see the hyper specialization. I think that generalized environments are going to be really amazing for proof of concepts and testing and getting something off of the ground. But then I think eventually sophisticated developers and sophisticated parties are going to move and then want to specialize. And then, there's this flywheel here. But I think the problem is going to be significantly worse until it gets, till we even start to see an upturn. And I think in 2 years, it's just going to be worse.
Well, I'll just wrap up by saying that I think we all agree on the panel, the power and value of interoperability. How we get there, I think, is TBD, but we're all excited for that future to come to fruition eventually. I just want to say thank you all to these wonderful panelists for this amazing conversation.
Great discussion, Jad and speakers. If you guys want to head to room 107, 108, and 109 for a post-panel Q&A, that would be fantastic. Anybody with questions, feel free to follow them that way. Room 107, 108, and 109. If not, stay for the next session here. Yes. Of course.